Welcome back to XRP Daily Brief, the channel where we break down everything happening around XRP, crypto, and the future of digital finance. If you're new here, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of these deep dives. Today we're talking about something that could be a genuine turning point for XRP in the United States and globally. XRP has just entered a new phase under US regulation, and the implications are massive. So let's get straight into it. The big story is this: XRP has just received its first ever CFTC regulated listing in the US. A new US spot crypto exchange called Bitnomio has launched with XRP listed under full CFTC oversight from day one. That means XRP can now be traded as spot, futures, perpetuals, and options, all under a federal US regulator. No other US exchange has done this for XRP before. XRP is no longer sitting in that gray area of just another altcoin being traded purely on speculation. It is stepping into the role of a regulated market infrastructure asset. What does that really mean? It means that XRP is now being treated almost like institutional-grade collateral. Financial institutions can potentially post XRP or RLUSD as margin, similar to how they use treasuries, cash, or major stablecoins. This significantly upgrades XRP's legitimacy in the eyes of professional traders and big institutions. It's not just a speculative token anymore. It's becoming a tool inside the regulated financial system. From your perspective as an investor or someone following crypto, this is a big narrative shift. XRP is now directly connected to CFTC-regulated derivatives markets and can be used in physically settled futures, perpetual contracts, and options. This is the same type of infrastructure that supports government bonds, large-cap equities, and other top-tier financial assets. In other words, XRP is moving from the speculation bucket into the infrastructure bucket. Bitnomio, as a designated contract market, has set up XRP and RLUSD as acceptable collateral for leveraged trading. That includes futures, options, and perpetual contracts. This means XRP is now a usable asset in a fully regulated futures clearinghouse environment. When you combine spot trading, derivatives, and collateral usage under regulation, you get something extremely powerful. Institutions can finally use XRP in ways they simply could not before. We're talking about banks, hedge funds, trading firms, and asset managers using XRP as margin, just like they do with cash and T-bills. That opens the door to a completely different level of institutional participation. On top of that, Ripple is not just pushing XRP by itself. They're also strategically building around RLUSD, their USD-backed stablecoin, and integrating it into this same collateral stack. That positions Ripple's ecosystem as more than a cross-border payment solution. It starts to look like a full-scale financial infrastructure for regulated digital assets. By embedding XRP and RLUSD into CFTC-approved structures, Ripple is essentially laying down new plumbing for digital finance, one that professional traders and institutions can trust and plug into without stepping outside regulatory frameworks. At the same time, the ETF landscape for XRP is heating up. Asset managers like Bitwise and others have launched XRP ETFs that give investors easy exposure without having to hold the token directly. These ETFs typically buy and custody XRP off-exchange, taking coins out of circulating supply. So you have this combination: increasing institutional interest, growing regulatory clarity, and ETFs that are quietly absorbing large quantities of XRP. When demand rises while liquid supply is being constrained, basic economics says price pressure tends to move upward over time. This marks a major narrative change. For years, the SEC lawsuit hanging over Ripple and XRP acted like a giant brake on adoption. Institutions didn't want to touch an asset under direct legal attack. Now that the lawsuit is resolved and XRP has regulatory clarity in key areas, that barrier has been lifted. The playing field is much more open. XRP can finally be adopted, integrated, and used inside real-world financial systems rather than being sidelined as a legal question mark. We also have to talk about liquidity and transparency. With XRP being approved for margin use and integrated into regulated derivatives venues, liquidity can now flow through channels that institutions are comfortable with, regulated, auditable, and transparent. When an asset trades in opaque venues with unclear rules, big players stay away. When it trades under a federal framework with proper market structure, spot, futures, options, clearing, suddenly it becomes much easier for large capital allocators to enter, hedge, and build structured products around it. Over time, that sort of environment supports deeper liquidity, more sophisticated trading strategies, and a more mature price discovery process. Now let's look at RLUSD again for a second. Ripple's strategy is clearly about pairing XRP as a bridge and liquidity asset with RLUSD as a stable store of value and collateral. Think of it as a two-part system. XRP moves value quickly and efficiently. RLUSD anchors that value in a USD-pegged regulated form. Together, they create an ecosystem that fits the needs of institutions that want speed and global reach, but cannot compromise on regulatory compliance and stability. Zooming out to the global picture, XRP is not just progressing in the US. In Europe, Ripple and partners are pushing euro-backed MiCA-compliant stablecoins on the XRP ledger. These are live on platforms like Swissborg, allowing users to access them in multiple fiat currencies. Audits by firms like KPMG and backing by regulated financial institutions add another layer of trust. This shows that the XRP ledger is not just a theoretical solution for payments and tokenization. It is already being used in real, regulated environments. This global adoption matters because the future of finance is not limited to a single jurisdiction. Cross-border interoperability is where XRP has always stood out. Most financial systems today are siloed. Each bank, clearinghouse, exchange, or region has its own ledger, its own rules, and its own settlement delays. XRP was designed to connect these silos, to act as a neutral bridge asset that can settle value between different currencies, platforms, and even asset types nearly instantly. Projects and pilots involving institutions like the DTCC and others show how XRP could act as the intermediate asset linking tokenized securities, digital cash, CBDCs, and stablecoins. To do that at scale, you need liquidity and regulatory clarity. That's exactly what these recent developments are building towards: a highly liquid, regulated, and globally available bridge asset that institutions can rely on for high-volume, cross-time zone transfers. From a market structure perspective, XRP trading in regulated spot, futures, and options markets helps create a more reliable and transparent price. Institutions care deeply about data quality and market integrity. If the price of an asset is easily manipulated or opaque, they will hesitate to size in. When price is discovered across multiple regulated venues with proper reporting, margining, and clearing, it becomes much safer to deploy serious capital. Again, that sets the stage for deeper adoption. Now let's bring psychology into this, because markets are not just numbers. They're people reacting to information. When news like XRP gets CFTC regulated listing in the US hits, it acts as a massive confidence signal. Institutions see reduced regulatory risk. Retail investors see validation. Media coverage amplifies the story. But these effects don't unfold all at once. At the beginning, it's mostly the so-called smart money that starts positioning. They accumulate while the majority either doesn't understand the significance or is still skeptical from past narratives. That's where ETFs, institutional custody, and regulated collateral usage become extremely important. These vehicles are quietly absorbing XRP and removing it from liquid circulation. Meanwhile, awareness among retail and late-stage institutions often comes later. after prices start reacting. This is where FOMO kicks in. As flows increase into ETFs, as more exchanges and platforms announce support for XRP as collateral, more participants rush in, creating a feedback loop. More demand, more price action, more attention, and so on. You also have the global confidence effect. When investors in Europe see XRP used in MiCA-compliant structures, and investors in the US see CFTC-regulated listings and futures, it builds a cross-regional sense of legitimacy. Other regions like Asia, the Middle East, and Latin America tend to watch these developments closely. Once a regulatory and technical model proves it can work in major markets, it's much easier to replicate and adapt it elsewhere. That increases XRP's network effect as a settlement and bridge asset. All of this feeds into one big idea. XRP is evolving from a speculative asset into a core component of emerging financial infrastructure. It's gaining regulatory clarity, being integrated into derivatives and collateral frameworks, paired with institutional-grade stablecoins, and used in cross-border payment and tokenization pilots. ETFs and custody solutions are locking up supply, while new demand mechanisms are emerging. The long-term setup is less about hype and more about structural adoption. And that's the key point for long-term holders. You're not just holding a token hoping for a random pump. You're potentially holding a piece of a growing, regulated infrastructure layer that sits between traditional finance and the digital asset world. If the trend continues, more banks, more clearinghouses, more funds, more regions integrating XRP and RLUSD, then the story around XRP could look very different compared to the last cycle. Less courtroom drama, more real-world integration. So the big question now is timing and positioning. Regulatory clarity, ETF accumulation, CFTC-regulated derivatives, European adoption, stablecoin integration, and cross-border pilots are all converging. That doesn't mean price will move in a straight line, markets never do. But it does mean the foundation underneath XRP is getting stronger and more institutional by the day. That's it for this XRP Daily Brief. If this breakdown helped you better understand what's really happening behind the headlines with XRP, don't forget to like the video, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next update. Tell me in the comments, do you think this marks the beginning of the institutional phase for XRP? Or is the market still sleeping on what's coming? Thanks for watching. Stay focused, stay XRP strong, and I'll see you in the next brief.